Racist manager tells, no foreigners, to an undercover CEO. By noon, he's deported and banned. Before we get into this story, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you enjoy stories like these, make sure to subscribe, as we upload at the same time every day. Ethan stepped into the bustling lobby of the upscale restaurant, wearing a faded jacket and scuffed work boots that made him look more like a courier than the multimillionaire CEO he actually was. His heart pounded because he knew something was seriously wrong with this branch. Reports had been flooding his desk about a manager named Greg who was allegedly turning away job applicants who had foreign accents and quietly firing any immigrant workers. Ethan had built his company on values of inclusion and world-class service, so the fact that one of his key establishments might be harboring someone racist was infuriating. Before he could even get past the front desk, a sharp voice snapped at him. "You lost or something? We don't need foreigners walking in here." That was the first red flag, loud and clear, and it came straight from the mouth of Greg himself. Immediately, Ethan realized this was worse than he'd imagined. He'd chosen to go undercover because he wanted to see the extent of the damage firsthand, but hearing Greg spit out those words so brazenly made Ethan's anger flare. He forced himself to stay calm and in character, feigning a thick accent as he stuttered. I'm here about a job. I heard you might be hiring." Greg scowled, looking Ethan up and down like he was scum stuck to his shoe. Ethan could feel the eyes of the patrons glancing over, and the tension among the wait staff was palpable. No one dared to say anything, though a young waitress in the corner looked as if she wanted to speak up. Greg gave her a threatening glare, and she immediately averted her gaze. The manager turned back to Ethan. "We don't hire people who don't belong here," he said, enunciating each word as if he were talking to a child who didn't understand basic English. Ethan nodded meekly, pretending he hadn't fully grasped the insult. "I just need a chance," he said. "I have experience in kitchens. I worked in hotels back home." Greg sneered. "Back home? Right. Not here. And this is where it counts. Now scram. We're busy." He waved a dismissive hand, making a show of pulling out a clipboard and flipping pages. Ethan lingered a moment longer, scanning the room. Despite the obvious attempt to get rid of him, he wanted to see how the staff reacted. Many of them had overheard. Some exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared speak up. It was clear Greg held iron-fisted control over them, instilling fears so effectively that even a blatant act of racism went unchallenged. One of the busboys, a quiet young man with tired eyes, looked like he wanted to intervene but quickly busied himself with stacking plates. The waitress Ethan had noticed earlier slipped away, clearly uncomfortable. Ethan realized that if these were the conditions out front, it might be even worse in the kitchen. But Greg was already storming off to bark orders at someone else, leaving Ethan alone in the lobby. He decided to test his luck and meander further into the restaurant. He slipped past the host stand and walked around, observing the staff. The decor was lavish: high ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, and plush velvet booths that catered to well-heeled clientele. From the outside, it was the picture of success and sophistication, exactly the brand Ethan wanted for his chain. But beneath the polished surface, there was a current of fear and tension. He heard whispers among a few staff members, snippets of conversation about "another one who got fired for no reason," and "he said we're not allowed to speak Spanish in front of customers." Hearing those bits hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. So, Greg had demanded that employees refrain from speaking their native languages. Ethan inhaled deeply, reminding himself to maintain the undercover persona for just a while longer. A new commotion drew his attention. Greg was scolding someone near the bar area, and Ethan drifted closer to listen. "I told you, no more breaks until the dinner rush is done," Greg hissed. "You want to stand around chatting in Spanish, you can do it on your own time. Understand?" A dishwasher, sweat beading on his forehead, nodded rapidly. "Yes, sir. I just needed some water," he replied softly. Greg rolled his eyes. "Get it quickly and get back. We don't have time for slackers." Then he turned to the bartender. "What are you gawking at? You got something to say? The bartender shook his head and focused on cleaning the counter. Greg snorted. Didn't think so. He marched off, and Ethan couldn't help but notice the silence that followed in his wake. Ethan needed an official excuse to stay on the premises long enough to collect the evidence he needed. He decided to approach the waitress he'd seen earlier. She was scribbling an order at a small service station. Her name tag read, Maria. He moved next to her, spoke in a hushed tone, still faking a slight accent. Hey, I'm trying to apply. Do you know if they're really not hiring? She glanced around nervously before leaning in. He doesn't want foreign workers, she whispered, her voice thick with worry. I'm sorry. That's just how he is. Ethan nodded, his voice low. I see. Is that even allowed? Maria shook her head. No, but he does it anyway. If you complain, he finds a reason to fire you, or he just makes your life miserable. She bit her lip. Last month he got rid of the Haitian dishwashers. They were some of the best workers here, but he told them to go back to their own country. Ethan felt a surge of fury. Why hasn't anyone reported him? He asked softly. Maria shrugged. People have. But he's got connections, or he lies. Nothing sticks. We're all afraid. Ethan forced a sympathetic smile. Well, maybe that'll change soon, he said, stepping back. He'd seen enough to confirm that the stories he'd been receiving weren't exaggerated in the slightest. In fact, it seemed they might be sugar-coated compared to the reality. Greg wasn't just discriminating, he was brazen about it, terrorizing employees to maintain silence. Taking a mental note of everything, Ethan decided it was time to push a bit further and see just how far Greg would go. He headed toward the kitchen, intentionally looking lost. A couple of line cooks were busy flipping steaks and plating gourmet dishes. The rush of activity was intense, but the hush that fell when Ethan entered was even more noticeable. People seemed guarded, unsure if they could trust him. He recognized that fear. It was the same fear that keeps good people from speaking up. Greg's management style was a toxic mix of intimidation and bigotry, and it was swirling through every part of the operation. Ethan planned to fix that, starting tonight if he could. As he surveyed the scene, he couldn't help but think, if Greg was this brazen in front of customers, how many other employees had he already driven away? Ethan positioned himself at the edge of the kitchen, near a battered metal rack stacked with clean plates. He pretended to check his phone, though he was using it to record audio discreetly. He wanted tangible evidence. Mere accusations wouldn't be enough to hold Greg accountable at the corporate level, especially if Greg tried to twist the narrative. Dude, you shouldn't be in here, one of the cooks muttered under his breath. Ethan nodded. I'm trying to apply. Didn't realize this was employees only. The cook hesitated, threw a quick glance at the door, then said quietly, Greg's not gonna like this. He's already on edge. If you don't want trouble, you'd better go. Ethan forced a sheepish grin. Thanks for the warning. He turned around, nearly colliding with Greg, who had somehow appeared behind him like a watchdog. You again? Greg barked. I told you to leave. Ethan took a step back, feigning intimidation. I'm sorry, sir. I just wanted to see if I could maybe wash dishes or clean up. I work hard and I... Greg cut him off with a snort of laughter. Hard worker, huh? That's what they all say. Then they come in here and think they can slack off because no one understands them when they speak their gibberish. The man's eyes narrowed. I'm not running a charity. You want to make a buck, do it elsewhere. Ethan lowered his gaze. I see. Sorry for bothering you. Greg nodded smugly. Next time, read the sign on the door. If you even can read. He turned to the cooks, pointing at them. And the rest of you, get back to work. We've got a full house tonight, and I don't pay you to stand around gawking. When Greg stormed out, Ethan exhaled, letting his pent-up anger diffuse for just a moment. The disrespect Greg showed toward immigrant workers was beyond the pale. If Ethan had any doubts about whether this manager should be fired, they vanished in that moment. He slipped back into the dining area, where he took a seat at a small table near the corner. From this vantage point, he could observe the restaurant's operations as both staff and customers mingled. He watched Maria skillfully manage her tables, always checking on her guests with a warm smile. He noticed how Greg treated different customers differently. If they appeared foreign or had an accent, he'd scarcely give them a nod. But wealthy patrons or those who seemed more local were greeted with excessive enthusiasm. Another wave of patrons arrived, and Ethan recognized a woman who looked distinctly East Asian accompanied by a friend. Greg spotted them, squared his shoulders, and strode over. Ethan strained to hear. "We have a strict reservation policy," Greg said coldly. The woman stammered. "I called earlier, and the person on the phone said we could walk in, that you weren't fully booked." Greg shrugged. "Well, that must have been a mistake. We're at capacity." Ethan scanned the room. It wasn't nearly at capacity. There were at least 3 empty tables in plain sight, but Greg continued. "Try calling next time, maybe. Or find somewhere else that's more suitable." The condescending tone dripped with the implication that they didn't belong. Ethan felt his jaw clench. The woman and her friend exchanged hurt glances and left without further complaint. Greg's intolerance wasn't hidden. It was front and center, poisoning every interaction. Ethan was done waiting. He'd seen and heard enough to know that Greg needed to be confronted immediately, or he would continue harassing both customers and staff. But Ethan also knew he had to make it count. He wanted a scenario where Greg's true colors would be exposed to everyone, from corporate staff to loyal patrons, so that no excuse or false narrative could save Greg's job. Ethan glanced at the silent staff members scurrying around like they were tiptoeing on eggshells. He decided to stage a bit of a confrontation in front of people, to force Greg to reveal his bigotry openly. Maybe that would empower the staff to come forward too. He stood up, cleared his throat, and approached Greg, who was directing a server on how to set up a wine display. "Excuse me," Ethan said in his fake accent. "I really need a job. I have no place to go." Greg spun around, annoyance etched on his face. "You're still here? Are you deaf or just dumb? Didn't I tell you we don't have room for foreigners?" The server gasped softly. A couple of customers turned their heads. One older man muttered under his breath in shock. "I can do anything," Ethan persisted, unwavering. "I'll wash dishes, clean floors, anything you need." Greg chuckled, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. "Kid, you don't get it. We don't want your kind here. You're just a nuisance, and I don't want to deal with the paperwork, the language barrier, or your whining. Got it? Now beat it." Ethan inhaled sharply. The silence around them was deafening. More patrons were now watching, and staff members were frozen. Greg realized they were being observed, so he lifted his head, trying to salvage some sense of authority. "Is there a problem?" he snapped at the onlookers. Most turned away, not wanting to engage. But a tall man at a nearby table stood up. "Yeah, there's a problem," the man said sternly. "That was the rudest thing I've heard a manager say in a long time. How dare you talk to him like that?" Greg rolled his eyes. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. Trust me, we have policies." But the man cut him off. "I'm a paying customer, and I don't want to support a restaurant that treats people like garbage." Greg sneered, but before he could respond, the man turned to Ethan. "Hey, if you need a job, come by my business. We welcome people who actually want to work hard." Ethan gave a polite nod, playing the humble role. He looked around and noted that 2 or 3 other tables seemed similarly appalled, while others glanced away awkwardly. Greg was flustered. This was the first time someone had called him out so publicly. "You need to learn your place," Greg growled to Ethan, ignoring the man's comment. "And that's not here. Now get out, or I'll have security throw you out." Ethan nodded slowly, pretending to retreat. Inside, he was boiling, but he had what he needed: multiple witnesses, recorded audio, and a public display of Greg's racism. It was time to move on to the next phase. He'd gather enough evidence in the next few minutes to ensure Greg couldn't wiggle his way out of repercussions. Maria found Ethan near the restrooms, looking subdued. She touched his arm gently. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. He gets away with this because nobody does anything. Everyone's too scared. Ethan offered a tight smile, still in character. You don't have to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. She glanced down the hallway. He's going to make your life hell if he catches you again. Just be careful. Ethan nodded. Thank you for warning me. But I'm not leaving yet. I've got something to do. She didn't seem to understand, but she wished him luck before heading back to the dining area. Ethan took a moment to gather himself. The plan was simple. Reveal his true identity to everyone present once he'd cornered Greg into the kind of discriminatory rant that would be impossible to explain away. He wanted to do it in front of customers, staff, and maybe even local authorities if he could arrange that. It was time for the hidden conflict to come fully into the open. He stepped back into a hallway leading to the manager's office, spotting Greg heading inside and slamming the door shut behind him. One of the employees, a timid hostess, was scurrying away, looking upset. Ethan quickly intercepted her. Is something wrong? She looked at him with wide eyes. He just fired me, she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. He said I was letting too many foreigners in. I didn't even know they were foreigners. I'm just seating customers. But he's blaming me for everything, saying I'm incompetent. She shook her head. I need this job so badly. And now it's gone. Ethan's heart panged with empathy. I'm so sorry, he murmured. I promise this won't go unnoticed. She gave him a confused glance, not understanding his words, then hurried off to gather her belongings. Now Ethan knew the situation was hitting a breaking point. This was not just a matter of telling people to leave. Greg was actively punishing his own staff for not participating in his bigotry. That was the final straw. Ethan marched up to the closed office door, took a deep breath, and tried the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and found Greg sitting at his desk, scribbling something furiously on a piece of paper. Greg looked up, startled, and then angry. What the hell are you doing back here? He snapped. You have no business in my office. Ethan shut the door behind him. He began recording with video this time, the phone camera just slightly peeking out of his jacket. I think I do have business here, Ethan said, dropping the forced accent. Greg's eyes narrowed. Where'd your accent go? Ethan smirked, ignoring the question. You just fired that hostess, didn't you? Greg shrugged. Yeah, she was incompetent. Couldn't follow simple directions. Let in a bunch of foreigners who made the restaurant look bad. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. She should be grateful I even gave her a chance in the first place. Ethan's voice tightened. She needs that job to support her family. And you fired her because you're racist? Greg's nostrils flared. Watch your mouth. I'm not racist. I just prefer a certain quality of staff and clientele. If that makes me a bad guy, so be it. Ethan felt every muscle in his body tensing. You have no idea how wrong you are, he growled. You've been discriminating against people based on their accent, their background, and you have the audacity to call yourself a manager? Greg's lips curled. I have the authority to run this place as I see fit. If corporate has a problem, they can come down here themselves. But they won't, because this branch is profitable. And as long as I keep the place profitable, nobody at the top cares. Ethan tried to keep his composure, but anger nearly made him shake. You really believe that? Greg smirked. I know it. I've been here for years, and nobody's managed to touch me. Some fancy suits come in sometimes, but I give them great service, kiss their asses, and send them on their way. They never poke too deep. He stared at Ethan suspiciously. Unless you're a corporate rat yourself. Ethan said nothing for a moment, letting Greg's words hang in the air. The manager snorted. I knew it. Well, guess what? I have friends in City Hall, friends in immigration enforcement. If you think you're going to bring a bunch of undocumented folks in here, think again. I'll have them all kicked out before you can blink. Ethan's eyes flickered with cold determination. He ended the recording, satisfied with the evidence he had for now. Then he turned on his heel and left the office, ignoring Greg's shouted insults to get out and never come back. Outside the door, a few employees stood with wide eyes. They'd probably heard at least part of the heated exchange. Ethan gave them a small nod, indicating they should keep quiet for just a bit longer. Something big was about to go down. Ethan decided the time was right for a public confrontation. He approached the dining area and signaled to Maria that she should gather the staff. He made his way to the center of the restaurant, where a few customers were still finishing their meals. Some had already left after witnessing Greg's tirade, but enough people remained for this to be a sizable audience. Greg was trailing behind, looking enraged, but also curious about what Ethan planned to do. Without waiting for permission, Ethan climbed onto a small raised platform near the bar, where a live band sometimes played on weekends, and spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the restaurant. "Excuse me, everyone. I have an announcement to make." A hush fell over the room. Greg rushed forward. "What are you doing? Get down!" But Ethan ignored him. "I've been told no foreigners allowed by the manager of this establishment. I've seen him harass, fire, and belittle immigrant workers. And I've heard him refuse service to people he deems not suitable." Several staff members had gathered now, Maria among them, looking nervously at Greg. The manager stood there, his face twisted in outrage, but also with a hint of apprehension. He might have been able to bluff his way through smaller, individual confrontations, but this was turning into a public spectacle. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Greg thundered, pointing a shaking finger at Ethan. Instead of responding right away, Ethan let a moment of silence stretch out, ensuring everyone's eyes were on him. Then, slowly, he pulled out his wallet, produced a corporate ID card, and held it up for everyone to see. "My name is Ethan Carter," he said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "I'm the CEO of this restaurant chain." A collective gasp rippled through the employees. A couple of the customers stood up in surprise. Greg staggered back a step, color draining from his face as though he'd seen a ghost. "That's impossible," he croaked, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd heard rumors of Ethan Carter making surprise visits, but he clearly never expected it to happen this way. Ethan continued, calm but seething with anger beneath his controlled demeanor. "I came here undercover because I've received complaints. At first, I thought they were exaggerations. But what I've seen tonight, the open racism, the abuse of power, the blatant disrespect for both staff and customers, goes far beyond anything I could have imagined." He swept his gaze across the room. "And I want everyone here to know that this is not how my company operates." Greg tried to laugh, a hollow, nervous sound. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're just a con artist trying to get some money out of the real CEO." But no one was laughing. An older gentleman in the corner spoke up. "I've seen pictures of Ethan Carter. That's definitely him. And I've watched him on those business shows." Another staff member chimed in quietly. "He looks different, but I can see it now." Ethan locked eyes with Greg. "Get your things, Greg. You're done here." Greg's face twisted in a snarl. "You can't fire me. We have contracts. And I've got enough dirt to." Ethan held up a hand. "Oh, I can. And I will. Effective immediately." He fished out his phone. "I have enough recorded evidence to support immediate termination for gross misconduct. And that's just the beginning." Greg's bluster returned. "You can't do this. You'll ruin me." He glanced around desperately, looking for allies. But the employees just stared, many of them with relief creeping into their expressions. Customers looked on with varying degrees of shock and satisfaction, some even clapping softly. One woman near the bar said, "It's about time." Greg's voice cracked. "You can't just show up and destroy a man's career in one night. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Ethan shrugged, unaffected by the threat. "Let them call me. I have more than enough to proceed. Besides, I have no interest in negotiating with you." Greg lunged a step forward, but one of the bigger busboys moved in between them. It was a testament to how fed up the staff was that someone who had been cowering from Greg's wrath moments before was now standing in his way. The manager stood there, fists clenched, trembling with rage. It looked like he was deciding whether to start throwing punches or to flee. Ethan spoke loudly, so everyone could hear. I came here to see if the complaints were valid. They are. And now I have to do what's right for this company and everyone who works here. He turned to the employees. If you have been mistreated by Greg or you've seen him discriminate against customers or staff, please step forward and share your story. I promise you will not face retaliation. For a moment, there was silence. Then Maria lifted her hand timidly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. He told me I wasn't allowed to speak Spanish to my mother on the phone if I was on the clock, she said, voice trembling. Said it made customers uncomfortable. Another server spoke up. He forced me to cut the hours of all the immigrant workers first whenever business was slow. A line cook joined in. He made fun of my accent. Told me I should practice in front of a mirror if I wanted to keep my job. The floodgates opened, and multiple employees began talking at once, each detailing experiences that underscored Greg's bigotry and tyrannical behavior. Greg stood there, face going from furious red to ashen white, as though he could feel the foundation of his power crumbling beneath him. Shut up, all of you! He shrieked at the employees, but they didn't stop. In fact, some even raised their voices, emboldened by the presence of the CEO. Ethan stepped down from the small platform, crossing to stand in front of Greg. I have more than enough cause to terminate you, Ethan said quietly. But after everything I've witnessed, I'm also going to be pressing legal charges for discriminatory practices. Greg's eyes bulged. You can't do that. Ethan raised a brow. I can and I will. Greg tried to gather himself, mumbling something about calling a friend who worked at immigration. He seemed genuinely desperate, as though that connection might still save him somehow. You can't fire me and protect all these illegals at the same time, he sneered, his voice cracking. I know at least half of them aren't documented. I'll have IC here before morning. Ethan's gaze hardened. Now you're threatening the livelihoods of innocent people. You realize that many of your employees are citizens or hold valid work permits, right? You also realize you've been bragging about false documents all night. You think that won't come back to bite you? Greg's lips parted in a grimace of panic. He seemed to realize that if he brought government scrutiny here, his own affairs might be exposed. But Greg was beyond rational thinking now, cornered like a wounded animal. He turned to the crowd of staff and customers. You're all witness to this. He's protecting illegals and foreign scum. The hush that fell was thick with tension. A few people murmured in disgust at Greg's words. Ethan took a measured step closer, his voice calm but laced with contempt. Your hatred has no place here. And if I find out you followed through on any threats against my employees, you'll regret it. Greg pointed a trembling finger at Ethan. You're making a big mistake. Ethan stared him down. You've been making a series of mistakes for a very long time. Now get out. The manager's gaze darted around, as if looking for a last resort. Finally, he looked at Ethan with pure loathing. You'll regret this. He spat, then turned on his heel and pushed his way through the crowd, disappearing out the front door. A heavy silence lingered after Greg's departure. Then, as if a collective breath had been held too long, people exhaled. One by one, employees began speaking, some laughing in relief, some crying, some just hugging each other. It was like the end of a storm that had raged too long. Ethan felt a flood of emotions, anger, relief, sorrow for what his employees had endured. But he wasn't done yet. He needed to ensure that Greg's influence ended permanently, and that no one else would be victimized by him. He asked one of the assistant managers, a quiet woman who'd been trying to do her best under Greg's regime, to step forward. You're now in charge, Ethan said firmly. We'll straighten out the formalities later, but for now, you're the ranking manager here. Understood? She nodded, clearly overwhelmed but also grateful. Before Ethan could say more, the doors swung open again. This time, 2 men in uniform strode in, flanked by a third in a suit who carried a briefcase. Everyone tensed, wondering if Greg had actually called the authorities to come after the workers. But the man in the suit quickly approached Ethan, saying, "Mr. Carter, I'm with corporate HR. We got your message and rushed over." Ethan nodded, relaxing slightly. "Good timing." The HR representative glanced around, eyes widening at the tension still thick in the air. "We need to speak in private about the termination process." Ethan shook his head. "We'll talk, but first, I want to do it publicly, so everyone here knows that this is not just me making a snap decision. I have evidence, witnesses, and official statements from employees. Greg is gone." The HR rep swallowed hard, but nodded. "As you wish." The employees listened as Ethan briefly explained that Greg had been removed for discrimination, harassment, and creating a hostile work environment. He assured them that corporate would provide full support, including reviewing records of anyone unfairly fired or underpaid, and ensuring they had a path to return to work if they wished. A soft murmur of relief ran through the crowd. Maria looked as though a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She stepped forward and mustered her courage, addressing Ethan. "What if he comes back or tries to harm us some other way?" Ethan gave her a confident nod. "He won't. But if he tries, call me or HR immediately. We will protect you. That is a promise." She nodded, tears forming again, but this time, they seemed like tears of relief. Ethan stepped outside to gather his thoughts in the cool night air, only to find Greg pacing on the sidewalk, phone in hand. The manager was clearly fuming, red-faced, and spitting curses into his device. When he saw Ethan, he ended the call abruptly. "You think you can just end me?" he growled, taking a step forward. "I gave years to this place." Ethan stood his ground. "Years of abusing people. Years of turning my restaurant into a hostile environment for immigrants and anyone you considered foreign. You're the one who ended yourself." Greg scoffed. "You're just an idealist who can afford to be. In the real world, people like me keep the wheels turning, not some charity-obsessed fool." Ethan exhaled. "Is that why you employed your own family and friends illegally? Because you're so essential?" Greg's eyes darted around. "What are you talking about?" Ethan gave a small, humorless laugh. "I know about the off-the-books employees. I have the paperwork. You've been pocketing extra money, skipping taxes, and scamming the system to cover your tracks. Guess what? That's a criminal offense." Greg blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. Then he hissed, "So what? You think I'm the only one doing that? You think you're some saint?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "I'm not a saint. But I try to run a fair business. You've left me no choice but to involve law enforcement." Greg's face went pale. "Law enforcement?" Ethan nodded. "Now get out of here. I suggest you contact a lawyer. You'll need one." Greg's bravado seemed to crumble. He opened his mouth as if to say something more, but instead hurried off, disappearing into the night. Ethan watched him go, then turned to see the HR representative stepping outside. The man shook his head, looking rattled. "We found so many falsified documents in his office," he said quietly. "It's bad. This is going straight to the legal department." Ethan nodded, rubbing his temples as the weight of the night's events began to set in. "Make sure we protect the employees who were harmed. They shouldn't have to suffer any consequences from Greg's actions." The HR rep agreed. "Absolutely. And we'll coordinate with local agencies to ensure no one with valid status gets swept up in this. As for Greg, it looks like he might have been exaggerating some claims about his own immigration paperwork to avoid taxes. He could be facing immediate deportation once this is all processed." Ethan felt a surge of grim satisfaction. "Poetic justice," he muttered under his breath. He returned inside, where a wave of employees, cooks, waiters, dishwashers, approached him. A man in a wrinkled apron stood at the front of the group. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We've all been so scared for so long. We thought nobody cared, that corporate only cared about profit. But you came." Ethan looked him in the eyes, feeling both the gratitude and the lingering pain. "I'm sorry it took so long, but I'm here now. And I promise things will change. Please be patient with the transition." We'll do whatever we can to make this right. The man nodded, and a few others murmured their thanks. Maria reached out and gently squeezed Ethan's arm. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We were so close to giving up. Ethan smiled wearily, scanning the faces that now looked relieved, hopeful, and determined. No more giving up, he said softly. From here on out, this place will be what it was always meant to be, somewhere people from all backgrounds can thrive. A quiet applause rose among the employees, and Ethan felt tears prick the corners of his own eyes. The events of the evening had been far more dramatic than he planned, but it was worth it to see these people finally free from Greg's tyranny. He signaled to the assistant manager to gather everyone around. I'm not leaving until we make a plan for tomorrow, he said. Let's all talk about how to move forward together. Morning came faster than expected, bringing a new sense of calm to the restaurant. With Greg gone, the staff arrived feeling lighter, though still uncertain about the future. Rumors had spread that Greg was in serious legal trouble, possibly even on the fast track for deportation due to the questionable status of his own visa. Ethan, who had napped just a few hours in a nearby hotel, reappeared at the restaurant bright and early, determined to set the tone for the day. The assistant manager greeted him with a smile, the relief still evident. Everyone's here, she said, leading him to a large table set up in the main dining area. Dozens of employees stood around, some sipping coffee, others looking like they'd barely slept. A sense of cautious optimism filled the air. Ethan began by thanking them all for their courage. I know how terrifying it can be to speak up against someone who holds power over your livelihood, he said, his voice steady. But you did. And because of that, we can start rebuilding. Several employees nodded, some with tears in their eyes. Ethan explained the next steps, a thorough review of hours, wages, and firings. Anyone who had been unjustly terminated under Greg's regime would be given a chance to return. Employees who had been harassed or discriminated against would be given resources to file formal complaints with corporate. The staff listened, enraptured by the sudden possibility of genuine change. Maria raised her hand. What about customers who come in and also discriminate? Greg would never defend us. Will we have a policy that protects us from that too? Ethan smiled. Yes. From now on, zero tolerance for harassment of any kind. If a customer is abusive, you'll have every right to ask them to leave. And if you feel unsafe, call the manager on duty or call me directly. He paused, then added, That's a promise. The meeting lasted over an hour, with employees sharing their experiences, asking questions, and slowly letting go of the fear that had clung to them. By the end, there was a sense of unity in the air, as though the staff were finally allowed to come together as a team, rather than being pitted against each other by a tyrannical manager. Ethan felt his chest swell with pride. This was the culture he'd always wanted to foster. He knew it would take time to heal all the wounds Greg left behind, but the first steps were being taken. Just as the meeting wrapped up, a man in a crisp suit stepped inside. He introduced himself as a representative from the local authorities who had been alerted to the restaurant's issues. He asked to speak to Ethan privately. The employees looked nervous, but Ethan assured them everything would be fine. In a corner booth, the official lowered his voice. We received multiple complaints about discrimination, and also some intel that the manager here was falsifying documents. Ethan nodded grimly. That's correct. We've got plenty of evidence of his wrongdoing. The official took out a notepad. We've taken Greg into custody this morning. Turns out his own visa was in violation, plus he's wanted for tax evasion. He might be looking at deportation, or worse, depending on how everything shakes out. Ethan felt a swirl of emotions, victory, sadness, and a strange sense of vindication. I won't pretend to be sorry, he said honestly. He hurt a lot of good people. The official nodded sympathetically. Our focus is on ensuring the employees here are safe. If any of them are out of status or worried about their paperwork, we'll work with them. We don't want them to be afraid. We want to go after the people who exploit them. Ethan agreed. Thank you. I'll pass that message along. We have quite a few immigrants on staff, some on valid visas, some permanent residents. Greg claimed they were undocumented, but I suspect he was lying about most of them. The official offered a small smile. Either way, we'll handle it with care. After exchanging contact information, the official left. Ethan returned to the group of employees, who stared at him expectantly. It's official, he announced. Greg's being charged with multiple offenses, and he's likely going to face deportation as a result of his own fraudulent documents. A wave of surprise and relief swept through the room. A dishwasher in the back asked softly, "So he can't come after us?" Ethan shook his head. "No. He's finished." The dishwasher exhaled shakily, and a small cheer broke out among the staff. They'd been living in fear of Greg's reprisals for too long. Satisfied that the restaurant was in good hands with the assistant manager and an upcoming corporate audit, Ethan finally allowed himself to relax. He walked around, speaking to employees individually, listening to their stories in more detail. Some had personal anecdotes of how Greg had tormented them, cutting their shifts, insulting their heritage, or threatening their families. Others shared bittersweet stories of how they'd once loved working in the restaurant before Greg was promoted to manager. Ethan took each story to heart, promising to make amends. He arranged for a special celebratory meal that evening, inviting all staff, past and present, to come together for a fresh start. The employees were thrilled, many of them saying this was the first time they felt genuinely welcomed in their own workplace. Maria pulled him aside at one point, eyes shining with gratitude. "You really did change everything," she said softly. "I never thought I'd see him gone. He seemed invincible." Ethan shrugged modestly. "He seemed that way because fear kept people from standing up to him. But his power was a mirage. Once we shined a light on his actions, it all collapsed." She smiled. "Thank you?" Then, with a sudden glint in her eye, she asked, "So, you were really undercover the whole time?" Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I had to see the truth for myself. Sometimes, reading reports isn't enough. You have to experience what people are going through, or you risk missing the human side of it." Maria nodded thoughtfully, then gave him a quick hug before hurrying off to help a customer. Ethan stood there for a moment, struck by how a simple act of kindness like that could mean so much in a place that had been ruled by fear. Night fell, and the restaurant hosted its new beginning dinner for all employees. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and chatter in multiple languages. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Just a day earlier, people were afraid to speak anything other than English, and now Spanish, French, Haitian Creole, and more filled the air in joyous harmony. Ethan circulated among the tables, sampling the food and making sure everyone felt included. He encouraged them to share cultural dishes, celebrate their backgrounds, and embrace the diversity that made the restaurant special. It was an emotional evening, with some employees tearing up as they realized they could finally be themselves without facing repercussions. At one point, the assistant manager tapped a glass to get everyone's attention. The clinking sound hushed the room, and she cleared her throat. "I just want to say a few words," she began. "I've been working here for years, and for most of that time, I've watched people suffer under Greg's control. We all felt powerless. But tonight, seeing us all together, celebrating without fear, I can't describe how good it feels. This place was meant to bring people joy, not pain. And now, I think we can finally do that." A round of applause followed. She turned to Ethan. "And we owe a huge thanks to the man who came here, went undercover, and risked his own comfort to expose the truth." She gestured for him to stand. An even bigger wave of applause broke out, with some employees even whistling and cheering. Ethan stood, feeling a bit awkward about the attention but also deeply moved. He raised his hands gently to quiet everyone. "Thank you," he said, voice resonating with genuine emotion. "But the real heroes are all of you who endured so much and still came in every day to keep this place running. My job was easy compared to what you've been through. Going forward, I want you to know you have the full support of corporate. If you see something unfair, speak up. If you're being mistreated, come to us. We can't fix what we don't know about. Our mission is to serve great food and create a welcoming environment for everyone, employees and customers alike. Tonight, let's celebrate that mission." The cheers filled the room, and the energy felt transformative, like a cloud had lifted from the entire establishment. After the speech, Ethan sat down next to Maria and a group of cooks. They laughed and joked, sharing bits of their lives. One cook admitted he'd been too scared to reveal his passion for music, which Greg had mocked. Another server showed pictures of her newborn baby, confessing she had been afraid to mention her maternity leave rights. Through each conversation, Ethan realized just how deeply Greg's tyranny had stifled not just their professional lives, but their personal aspirations as well. By the end of the evening, Ethan was exhausted but fulfilled. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that real change had taken place. The employees drifted out one by one, some hugging each other, some exchanging phone numbers to stay in touch, and all of them looking forward to the next day with a newfound sense of hope. Maria was one of the last to leave. She approached Ethan at the door. "Will you come back soon?" she asked, a bit shyly. "I'd like to. Maybe not in disguise next time," Ethan said with a grin. She laughed. "I think we'd recognize you anyway." He nodded. "I'll be around. This place is going to be better than ever." She gave him a parting wave and slipped out into the night. Ethan remained behind, letting the staff lock up. He took a slow walk through the now quiet dining area, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The memories of the past 24 hours replayed in his mind, the initial shock at Greg's blatant racism, the confrontation in the dining room, revealing his identity on that makeshift stage, and finally the moment Greg had stormed out. Despite all the chaos, the result was a sense of closure. The toxic manager was gone, soon to face legal consequences, and the employees had reclaimed their place. Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders finally ease. He had done what he needed to do. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. A cool breeze rustled the trees, and for the first time all day, he could breathe easily. He glanced back at the restaurant's sign, glowing softly in the night. It reminded him of why he started this business in the first place, to create an environment where people from all walks of life could come together and share their love for great food. Now that environment would be restored. He hopped into his car, started the engine, and began the drive back to his hotel, already thinking of new ways to support his employees. He wanted to establish stronger oversight, ensuring no manager could pull the same stunts Greg had. Perhaps a confidential hotline, more frequent visits, or routine anonymous surveys. Anything to prevent another Greg from taking root in his company again. In the coming days, news would spread about what happened. Some media outlets might pick up the story. CEO goes undercover, exposes racist manager. Ethan didn't relish the publicity for himself, but he hoped it would send a loud and clear message. Discrimination wouldn't be tolerated in his chain, or in any part of the service industry if he had any say in it. He also knew employees in other branches might feel more emboldened to speak up if they encountered similar injustices. Greg's downfall would be a warning to all the tyrants who took advantage of vulnerable workers. The next morning, Ethan woke up to several voice messages and emails, including one from the HR department confirming that Greg had indeed been taken into custody by noon for immediate deportation processing. The final note from the authorities indicated they were also investigating multiple charges of fraud. Greg had lied on his own visa application, manipulated payroll, and likely stashed away illegal earnings. Ethan felt no pity. There was a certain poetic justice in seeing Greg's threats of deportation aimed at innocent people boomerang back onto himself. Now Greg would face the very fate he had so eagerly used to terrify others. Ethan also noticed an outpouring of gratitude from employees, along with messages of relief that they could now work in peace. It was the best kind of feedback he could ever hope for. Though the chain still had many challenges ahead, rebuilding trust, reorganizing staff, this was a victory, and a significant one. As Ethan sipped his coffee and scrolled through the updates, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He had done the right thing, and the impact was already palpable in the lives of many. That evening, he returned to the restaurant to quietly observe the dinner service. Customers from various backgrounds were being seated with no issue. The hostess was smiling brightly as she welcomed them. Maria was at a table, chatting amicably with an older couple. The kitchen buzzed with efficient coordination, no sign of the old tension. The new manager caught Ethan's eye from across the room and gave a thumbs up, mouthing the words, "All good." Indeed it was. Ethan stepped back outside, letting the warm glow of the restaurant's lights fall behind him. He looked at the stars overhead, feeling an immense sense of gratitude. People deserved a place where they could work and dine without fear or prejudice, and tonight, that place finally existed here. The saga of the racist manager who said, "No foreigners allowed," was over, replaced by a renewed commitment to inclusivity and respect. Ethan made a mental note to replicate this vigilance across all his establishments. This restaurant would stand as a beacon, a reminder that when discrimination rears its ugly head, courage and truth can bring it down. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to ensure that legacy stayed alive. And so, with a final nod to the restaurant behind him, Ethan set off, carrying the lessons of this turbulent but transformative experience into the future.